Mom, we are boarding the plane tomorrow morning. The beach house has already been sold, so there is no reason for you to stay there anymore. Bye. The line went dead before I could answer. I slowly lowered the phone from my ear and stared out at the Atlantic Ocean through the giant living room windows while waves crashed softly against the dark shoreline outside. After almost 40 years of marriage and 23 years of motherhood, I had finally learned something painful. Sometimes the people who betray you the fastest are the ones who spent years pretending they loved you the most. My name is Lorraine Brooks. I am 63 years old, and until 3 months ago I believed my daughter Vanessa still had a heart somewhere underneath her obsession with luxury vacations, designer handbags, and social media attention. Then my husband Theodore died unexpectedly from a heart attack during a business conference in Chicago, and everything inside my family changed almost overnight. Theodore built Brooks Coastal Holdings from a single fishing supply warehouse into one of the largest private maritime logistics companies on the East Coast. Most people in Savannah, Georgia knew his name long before they ever knew mine. He was respected, admired, feared in business circles, and constantly invited to charity galas, expensive golf events, and political dinners. But inside this beach house just 15 yards from the ocean, he was simply Teddy. The man who brought me coffee every morning for 37 years and kissed my forehead before leaving for work no matter how busy he became. When he died, I thought the hardest part would be surviving the grief. I was wrong. The hardest part was watching my daughter transform into someone I barely recognized before the funeral flowers even disappeared from the dining room. Vanessa arrived at the house wearing oversized black sunglasses, carrying a $10,000 handbag, while speaking more about estate paperwork than her father's death. Her husband Marcus followed closely behind her, pretending to comfort me while secretly walking through every room like a real estate investor evaluating a future purchase. I noticed everything immediately. The whispers, the suspicious glances, the sudden interest in property taxes and ownership documents. But grief makes people tolerate behavior they would normally reject. So I stayed quiet. At first Vanessa pretended she was helping me. She ordered groceries I never asked for. Hired a cleaning service despite knowing I enjoyed cleaning the house myself. She even tried convincing me to move into a luxury retirement community outside Atlanta, because according to her, it would be safer for someone my age. Someone my age. I still remember how cold those words felt. I spent years raising that girl alone while Theodore traveled across ports and shipping yards building his company from nothing. I worked double shifts as a nurse when Brooks Coastal Holdings nearly collapsed during the recession. I sold my jewelry once to help Theodore make payroll for his employees. I stood beside that man when nobody believed in him. But suddenly after his funeral, I became an old woman everyone needed to manage politely before I became inconvenient. One night about 6 weeks after Theodore died, I overheard Vanessa speaking to Marcus on the upstairs balcony, while they thought I was asleep downstairs. "The property alone is worth at least $6 million now," she whispered excitedly. "And once Mom moves out, we can sell it fast before hurricane season." Marcus laughed softly. "Your father should have transferred everything years ago. We have been wasting time waiting." I sat silently in the dark living room listening to my own daughter discuss my home like I was already dead. That was the moment something inside me changed permanently. Not loudly, not dramatically, quietly, like a lock turning shut. The next morning I woke up before sunrise as usual and walked barefoot across the cold hardwood floors toward Theodore's old office near the back of the house. The room still smelled faintly like his cologne mixed with leather books and sea salt from the nearby ocean air. For weeks I had avoided entering that office because the grief felt unbearable inside those walls. But that morning something pulled me toward his desk. Maybe instinct. Maybe survival. Maybe Theodore himself. I sat slowly in his old chair and stared at the framed photograph beside the lamp. Theodore smiling beside our fishing boat 20 years earlier while Vanessa sat on his shoulders laughing in the summer sun. Back when money had not poisoned her yet. I opened the top desk drawer looking for absolutely nothing in particular when I noticed a small brass key taped beneath the wooden compartment. My heart immediately began beating harder. Theodore was obsessed with hidden compartments and private storage. Always. Had been. I quietly searched the office until I found an old locked cabinet, hidden behind rows of shipping industry books near the far wall. The brass key fit perfectly. Inside sat a thick black folder marked with only one sentence written in Theodore's handwriting. "For Lorraine only." I still remember the exact feeling in my chest when I opened that folder. Confusion first. Then disbelief. Then something much darker and more powerful. Because inside those documents was the truth my daughter and her greedy husband never imagined existed. The beach house Vanessa already sold behind my back was never legally hers to sell in the first place. My hands trembled slightly as I continued reading through the documents inside Theodore's black folder, while the sound of waves crashed quietly outside the office windows. The deeper I read, the colder my entire body became. Theodore had not simply protected the beach house. He had designed an entire legal structure around it years earlier without ever telling Vanessa. The property ownership belonged to something called the Lorraine Coastal Preservation Trust. My name was listed as the sole lifetime beneficiary and managing authority. Vanessa's name appeared nowhere on the ownership documents. Nowhere. Not as heir. Not as trustee. Not even as partial beneficiary. I kept turning pages slowly while my heartbeat pounded louder in my ears. Theodore had anticipated this. Somehow my husband knew exactly what would happen after his death. There were legal letters from attorneys dated almost 8 years earlier. Property transfer agreements. Offshore holding documents. Private banking records. Even handwritten notes from Theodore explaining why he structured everything secretly. One sentence nearly broke me emotionally. If Vanessa ever begins treating you like an obstacle instead of her mother, this trust becomes your shield. I covered my mouth with my hand and closed my eyes. Theodore knew. Deep down he already saw something dangerous growing inside our daughter long before I did. Suddenly every strange conversation from the last few years replayed differently inside my head. Vanessa constantly asking Theodore about inheritance planning during family dinners. Marcus obsessively discussing real estate markets every time he visited the beach house. Their sudden interest in luxury investments despite living far beyond their actual income. I remembered once hearing Marcus joke that older wealthy parents were basically walking retirement plans. Theodore laughed politely that night, but later after everyone left he sat quietly on the porch for almost an hour staring at the ocean without speaking. I understand now what haunted him. He realized greed had slowly replaced gratitude inside our daughter and her husband. The final section of the folder contained instructions from Harold Whitmore, Theodore's longtime attorney in Charleston. I immediately recognized Harold's name. He handled every legal transaction Theodore made for almost 30 years, and was one of the only people my husband truly trusted. Attached to Harold's letter was another envelope marked, "Only open if Vanessa attempts to sell the property." My stomach tightened instantly. I opened it carefully. Inside sat a single document that changed everything. Vanessa had unknowingly sold a property she legally did not own because Theodore intentionally transferred ownership into the trust before his death. The sales contract she signed was completely invalid. Not only that, but Harold had already been notified automatically the moment any unauthorized sale attempt appeared through county property systems. Theodore built safeguards everywhere. Layer after layer. Like he knew betrayal was not a possibility but an inevitability. I leaned back slowly in Theodore's chair and stared toward the ocean through the office windows while emotions crashed through me all at once. Grief. Relief. Rage. Shame. Heartbreak. Because part of me still wanted to believe my daughter was simply grieving badly instead of revealing her true character. But another part finally accepted reality. Vanessa was not confused. She was calculating. And Marcus was worse. Much worse. My phone buzzed suddenly on the desk, startling me. Vanessa. I stared at her name glowing on the screen for several seconds before answering. Hello, sweetheart. Her tone immediately sounded rushed and irritated. Mom, did you sign the temporary relocation papers yet? I glanced down at the documents spread across Theodore's desk. Not yet. She sighed dramatically. We talked about this already. Marcus found you a beautiful condo outside Atlanta with security and medical staff nearby. Nearby. As if I was already halfway buried in a cemetery. I am still thinking, I replied calmly. Vanessa's voice sharpened slightly. Mom, there is nothing to think about anymore. The buyers already wired the deposit for the beach house. I almost laughed hearing that sentence. Not because it was funny. Because my daughter sounded so confident while standing on top of a lie she did not even realize existed. That sounds complicated, I answered quietly. What does that mean? she asked immediately. Nothing, sweetheart. Silence. Then I heard Marcus speaking faintly in the background, asking her something. Vanessa covered the phone briefly before returning. Listen, we are flying to Greece tomorrow morning, so we need everything finalized tonight. Greece. Of course. My husband had not even been dead 90 days, and they were already celebrating European vacations with money connected to his estate. Something inside me hardened permanently at that moment. Enjoy your trip, I said softly. Mom, stop being difficult. Difficult? I stared at Theodore's empty chair across the office while my daughter spoke to me like an obstacle standing between her and a luxury vacation. I will handle things here, I replied calmly before ending the call myself. The silence afterward felt enormous. For almost 20 minutes I sat motionless in Theodore's office staring at the trust documents while waves rolled endlessly against the shore outside. Then finally I reached for the phone beside the desk and dialed Harold Whitmore's private number from memory. He answered immediately after the second ring. Lorraine. His voice sounded calm but unsurprised. I wondered when you would call. I swallowed slowly. You knew about all this? Every detail. And Theodore never wanted me to know? Harold paused briefly before answering carefully. Theodore hoped you would never need to know. My chest tightened painfully hearing that. Harold continued speaking softly. But he also knew Vanessa's husband was dangerous with money. Marcus. Marcus has over $2 million in hidden debt spread across failed investment partnerships, credit lines, and luxury loans. I closed my eyes immediately. My God. Theodore discovered everything almost 3 years ago, Harold said quietly. That is when he transferred the beach property entirely into the trust. Suddenly everything became horrifyingly clear. Marcus did not just want the house because it was valuable. He needed it. Desperately. Harold's voice lowered slightly. Lorraine, there is something else you need to understand. What? The buyers arriving next week are not ordinary buyers. My stomach tightened again. What do you mean? The man attempting to purchase the property is connected to one of Marcus's creditors. Cold fear spread slowly through my chest. You are saying this was planned? I am saying Marcus likely promised assets he never legally controlled. I stood slowly from Theodore's chair and walked toward the giant living room windows overlooking the dark Atlantic Ocean. For the first time since Theodore died, I no longer felt like a grieving widow. I felt like a woman standing inside a trap someone else accidentally stepped into first. Harold spoke again carefully. Lorraine, you need to decide something quickly. What? Do you want to stop this quietly? Or do you want them to learn the truth publicly? I looked out at the crashing waves while Vanessa's words replayed again inside my head. The beach house has already been sold. Bye. Then slowly, for the first time in months, I smiled. Harold Whitmore arrived at the beach house the following morning just after sunrise, carrying 2 leather briefcases and wearing the same gray suit he had probably owned since the early 1990s. Harold was 71 years old with tired blue eyes and the quiet posture of a man who spent decades listening more carefully than everyone around him. Theodore trusted him completely because, unlike most wealthy attorneys, Harold never performed importance. He simply understood power better than anyone else in the room. I opened the front door before he even knocked. You look exactly like Theodore did whenever someone underestimated him, Harold said quietly while stepping inside. That worries me. I smiled faintly for the first time in weeks. Coffee? Please. We sat together in the kitchen overlooking the ocean while sunlight slowly filled the beach house with soft golden light. Everything still felt surreal. Theodore gone. Vanessa betraying us. Marcus secretly drowning in debt. Harold opened one of the leather briefcases and carefully spread legal papers across the kitchen table. Before we discuss strategy, there are things Theodore wanted you to understand fully. I nodded silently. Harold slid a thick stack of documents toward me. Brooks Coastal Holdings is worth considerably more than Vanessa believes. How much more? Harold adjusted his glasses calmly. Last quarter, Theodore's private assets were valued at approximately $84 million. I nearly stopped breathing. Even after decades of marriage, Theodore still managed to shock me sometimes. I knew we were comfortable financially. I knew the company had grown enormously. But Theodore intentionally hid the full scale of his wealth from almost everyone, including me. Why would he keep that from me? I whispered. Harold looked toward the ocean briefly before answering. Because Theodore never trusted what wealth did to people. My chest tightened hearing that. He thought Vanessa would become greedy? Harold hesitated carefully. No. He thought Marcus would encourage the worst parts of her personality. Deep down I already knew he was right. Vanessa was not cruel as a child. Spoiled sometimes, yes. Materialistic occasionally. But not heartless. That transformation accelerated after Marcus entered her life 5 years earlier with his expensive suits, fake confidence, and endless obsession with appearing successful. He always reminded me of someone trying too hard to look rich because he secretly feared becoming poor again. Harold continued speaking while opening another folder. Marcus's financial situation is significantly worse than even Theodore realized initially. He handed me several printed reports from private investigators and banking analysts. I stared down at page after page of unpaid luxury loans, failed cryptocurrency investments, collapsed restaurant partnerships, and hidden gambling debts. The numbers felt unreal. $3.8 million? I whispered. Harold nodded slowly. And rising. I looked back up at him in disbelief. How has Vanessa not noticed this? Harold gave me a sad smile. Because Marcus built their entire marriage around appearances. Suddenly memories began rearranging themselves inside my head like puzzle pieces finally connecting correctly. The constant vacations. The luxury vehicles replaced every year. The giant Atlanta penthouse they could not realistically afford. Marcus always insisted success needed to look expensive before it became real. Theodore hated that mentality. Now I understood why. Harold pointed toward one particular document near the bottom of the stack. This concerns me most. Picked it up carefully. It was a private lending agreement between Marcus and an investment group based in Miami. The collateral listed included the beach house. My beach house. Oh my God, I whispered. He promised them property he did not own. Harold nodded again. And the buyers scheduled to inspect the house next week are connected directly to that group. I leaned back slowly against the kitchen chair while the weight of everything settled deeper into my chest. This was no longer about greed alone. Marcus was desperate. Desperate people become dangerous when their illusions begin collapsing publicly. What happens when they realize the sale is invalid? I asked quietly. Harold folded his hands together. That depends entirely on how publicly you choose to handle this. I stared toward the ocean through the kitchen windows. A storm was slowly building offshore, darkening the horizon line with heavy clouds. And what would Theodore do? Harold actually laughed softly hearing that. Lorraine, your husband, spent 37 years pretending he was the calmest man in every room. He paused carefully. But when someone threatened his family, he became very strategic. Strategic. That word stayed with me all morning. Because Theodore never believed in emotional revenge. He believed in consequences. Quiet ones.
Permanent ones.
Around noon my phone rang again. Vanessa. I placed the phone on speaker while Harold remained seated silently across from me. Isuadhart. Vanessa sounded unusually cheerful. Too cheerful. Mom, guess what? What? Marcus upgraded our hotel suite in Santorini. You would not believe this place. The balcony overlooks the entire ocean. I almost smiled hearing the irony in her voice, while she unknowingly bragged about a vacation funded by fraudulent promises tied to my home. That sounds beautiful, I answered calmly. It is incredible. Then her tone shifted slightly. By the way, the buyers want to schedule final property confirmation next Friday. So make sure the house is cleaned up before then. Cleaned up. I looked slowly around the kitchen Theodore and I built together almost 30 years earlier. The hand-painted cabinets. The old oak table Theodore refused to replace because Vanessa carved her initials underneath it as a child. The framed family photographs near the hallway entrance. This was not inventory. It was my life. I see, I replied quietly. Vanessa sighed impatiently. Mom, please do not make this emotional again. It is just a house. Harold lowered his eyes immediately after hearing that sentence. Because both of us understood something heartbreaking in that moment. Vanessa no longer recognized the difference between value and price. You are right, I said softly. It is much more than a house. Silence. Then Marcus's voice appeared faintly in the background asking her something quickly. Vanessa covered the phone for several seconds before returning, sounding distracted now. Listen, we have to go meet friends for lunch. Just make sure everything is ready before Friday. Of course, sweetheart. Love you. The line disconnected before I could answer. Harold sat quietly for a long moment afterward before finally speaking. That hurt you. I looked out toward the ocean again. No.
Y pausa briefly.
What hurts is realizing she probably has not meant those words sincerely in years. Harold closed his briefcase slowly. Lorraine, there is one more thing Theodore instructed me to tell you if this situation ever happened. Turned back toward him immediately. What? Harold reached inside his jacket pocket and carefully placed a small sealed envelope onto the kitchen table. Theodore's handwriting covered the front. For Lorraine. Only after betrayal becomes undeniable. Suddenly the room felt colder. My hands trembled slightly while opening the envelope. Inside was a handwritten letter from my husband dated 11 months before his death. I immediately recognized his handwriting. Strong. Controlled. Precise. Lorraine, if you are reading this, then Vanessa and Marcus finally crossed a line I prayed they never would. I need you to understand something clearly. You are not powerless. I spent years protecting you quietly because loving someone properly means preparing for the day you might not be there to protect them yourself. Do not let guilt convince you to surrender your dignity. And do not confuse mercy with weakness. The house was never the important part. You are. I stopped reading because tears blurred the words completely. Harold looked away respectfully toward the ocean while I cried silently in Theodore's kitchen. But underneath the grief something else slowly emerged for the first time since my husband died. Clarity. Because suddenly I understood exactly what Theodore had spent years building around me. Not just wealth. Protection. For the next 4 days I said absolutely nothing to Vanessa about the trust documents or the invalid sale. I cooked my breakfast every morning exactly the same way Theodore liked it, with buttered toast, scrambled eggs, and strong black coffee, while ocean waves rolled calmly beyond the kitchen windows. I watered the flowers near the back patio. I folded laundry. I watched old fishing boats drift across the shoreline at sunset. From the outside I looked like a grieving widow quietly accepting the inevitable loss of her home. That illusion became my greatest advantage. Meanwhile, Harold Whitmore worked silently behind the scenes, unraveling every legal thread Marcus accidentally tied around his own neck. Every afternoon Harold called with another update that made the situation worse for Vanessa and her husband. Marcus had secretly promised the beach house to multiple creditors, simultaneously hoping the sale money would temporarily stop his financial collapse long enough to refinance other debts. One creditor believed the property sale would cover luxury car loans. Another expected repayment from a failed Miami restaurant investment. And the private lending group connected to the buyers planned to use the house itself as leverage inside a larger coastal property acquisition scheme. Marcus did not simply lie. He built his entire life on overlapping lies held together by borrowed money and social performance. Theodore saw through him years earlier. I understand that now. On Thursday evening Vanessa called while I sat alone on the back deck watching lightning flash silently far out across the ocean horizon. Her voice sounded relaxed and expensive in the way wealthy vacationers often sound when they believe someone else is carrying the weight of reality for them. Mom, you would absolutely love Santorini, she said brightly. The sunsets here are unbelievable. I almost laughed softly hearing her describe beauty to me, while sitting beside one of the most beautiful coastlines in America. I am glad you are enjoying yourself, I answered calmly. Marcus says the buyers are arriving tomorrow morning for final walkthrough photos, so make sure the guest rooms are cleaned properly. Guest rooms. Theodore built those rooms by hand during summers when Vanessa was still in elementary school. He installed every wooden floorboard himself because he wanted his daughter to grow up with memories tied to craftsmanship instead of hired labor. I still remember Vanessa helping him paint one of those rooms pale blue while singing Disney songs off key at the top of her lungs. She cried afterward because paint accidentally stained her hair, and Theodore spent 2 hours making ridiculous pirate jokes until she laughed again. How does a child who once loved a home that deeply grow into an adult, willing to sell it behind her mother's back? I still do not fully know the answer. Mom, are you listening? Vanessa sounded irritated now. Yes, sweetheart. Good. Also, Marcus told the buyers you would probably move out within 2 weeks, so try not to delay things emotionally. Emotionally? That word again. Everything inconvenient became emotional in Vanessa's world. Grief, attachment, memory, loyalty. Apparently only greed counted as practical. I understand, I replied quietly. She hesitated briefly before speaking again. You know, this really is the best thing for everyone. I looked out toward the dark ocean while rain began falling softly against the deck railing. Is it? Silence. Then her tone hardened slightly. Mom, please do not start making me feel guilty. That sentence stayed with me long after the call ended, because it revealed something devastating about my daughter. Deep down, Vanessa already knew what she was doing was wrong. Otherwise, guilt would never frighten her so much. The next morning the buyers arrived just after 10 o'clock in a black luxury SUV, with tinted windows and Florida license plates. Harold stood quietly beside me near the front entrance, while we watched the vehicle pull slowly into the circular driveway Theodore designed decades earlier. 3 people stepped out. A sharply dressed man around 50 years old wearing expensive sunglasses. A younger woman carrying legal folders and property documents. And Marcus. My stomach tightened immediately seeing him unexpectedly return from Greece alone. He walked toward the house pretending confidence, but his face looked thinner somehow. Tighter. Like stress had finally started eating through the performance. Vanessa was nowhere in sight. Interesting. Harold whispered quietly beside me. What? I asked softly. Marcus did not tell Vanessa he returned early. Before I could respond, Marcus reached the front porch smiling broadly like a salesman trying too hard to appear relaxed. Lorraine, he said warmly while leaning forward for a hug I did not return. You look good. Harold stepped slightly beside me immediately. Marcus's smile faded for half a second after noticing him. Mr. Whitmore. Harold nodded politely. Marcus. The tension between them became instantly obvious. Marcus turned quickly back toward me. The buyers are excited to see the property in person. I looked calmly past him toward the strangers waiting near the SUV. I imagine they are. The older man approached next, extending his hand confidently. Victor Salazar. Pleasure meeting you, Mrs. Brooks. I shook his hand politely while studying his eyes. Theodore spent years teaching me how to recognize men who viewed every interaction as a negotiation instead of a relationship. Victor had those eyes. Cold. Measuring. Predatory beneath polished manners. Beautiful property, Victor continued while glancing toward the ocean. Marcus tells me the closing process should move quickly. Harold spoke before I could answer. That depends entirely on what you mean by closing. The younger woman carrying documents immediately looked confused. Marcus stiffened visibly. Victor slowly removed his sunglasses. I beg your pardon? Harold opened his leather briefcase calmly and handed Victor several official papers. The property ownership transfer filed by Mr. Hale is invalid, because the seller possessed no legal ownership rights whatsoever. Silence crashed across the front porch instantly. Marcus's face drained completely of color. Victor stared down at the documents while the younger woman quickly began reading over his shoulder. What is this? Victor asked sharply. Harold remained perfectly calm. The property belongs exclusively to the Lorraine Coastal Preservation Trust. Mrs. Brooks is sole beneficiary and managing authority. Your attempted purchase involved assets Mr. Hale had absolutely no legal ability to sell. Marcus stepped forward aggressively. That is impossible. Harold looked directly at him. No, Marcus. What is impossible is selling someone else's property to repay your private debts. The entire atmosphere changed immediately after that sentence. Victor slowly turned toward Marcus with a completely different expression now. No worms. No friendliness. Only cold suspicion. Marcus tried recovering quickly. There must be confusion in the paperwork. Harold handed Victor additional certified county records. There is no confusion. The younger woman finished reading the documents and whispered something urgently into Victor's ear. His jaw tightened instantly. I watched the panic slowly spread across Marcus's face while ocean wind whipped violently across the porch around us. For years that man treated life like theater, believing confidence alone could replace truth. But Theodore understood something Marcus never learned. Lies eventually become expensive. Victor stared at Marcus for several long seconds before speaking quietly. You told us the property transfer was finalized after Theodore Brooks died. Marcus swallowed hard. It was supposed to be. Supposed to be. Even now he still sounded like a man who believed intentions mattered more than legality. Victor looked disgusted. You involved us in fraud. No, Marcus snapped quickly. This is a misunderstanding. Harold calmly closed his briefcase. Actually, Marcus, it is multiple misunderstandings layered together over several years. I remained silent throughout the entire exchange because suddenly I understood why Theodore structured everything this way. He knew eventually people reveal themselves most honestly when their greed collides with consequences. Marcus looked toward me desperately now. Lorraine, say something. For a moment I simply stared at him quietly while rain clouds darkened the shoreline behind us. Then finally I spoke softly. You should have listened when Theodore warned you never to mistake kindness for weakness. Marcus stood frozen on the porch staring at me like he had suddenly realized the entire world beneath his feet was collapsing 1 inch at a time. Rain rolled steadily across the dark Atlantic sky while Victor Salazar quietly stepped away from him toward the driveway, speaking urgently into his phone. The younger woman followed closely behind, carrying the legal folders against her chest with obvious panic now visible in her expression. Harold Whitmore calmly gathered his documents without the slightest trace of emotion because, unlike Marcus, he understood financial disasters rarely explode all at once. They unravel slowly and publicly. Marcus looked back and forth between Harold and me, desperately trying to recover control over a situation that no longer belonged to him. Lorraine, please, he said quietly while lowering his voice. We can figure this out privately. Privately. Interesting word. For months he planned to remove me from my own home quietly and privately so nobody would notice what he was doing until it was too late. Now suddenly privacy mattered very much to him. Can we? I asked softly. Marcus rubbed both hands over his face aggressively before stepping closer toward me. Vanessa does not know about any of this. That sentence told me everything immediately. He was not worried about me. He was terrified of his wife discovering the truth about their finances. Harold looked at Marcus carefully. Your creditors know now. Marcus ignored him completely. Lorraine, please listen to me. I remained calm. I am listening. Rainwater dripped from the edge of the porch roof while Marcus struggled to keep his voice steady. The buyers wired significant deposits already, and I used some of that money temporarily, but I can fix this if everyone just stays calm. Temporarily. Another revealing word. Men like Marcus always described financial recklessness using temporary language, because admitting permanent failure would destroy the identity they built around appearing successful. Harold finally spoke firmly. How much did you take? Marcus hesitated too long before answering. About 800,000. Even Harold looked slightly stunned hearing that number. My chest tightened painfully because suddenly I understood the scale of the desperation hiding beneath Marcus's polished image all these years. You stole nearly $1 million against property you never owned? Harold asked quietly. Marcus snapped defensively. I was going to pay everything back after refinancing. With what assets? Harold replied immediately. Marcus said nothing. Because there were no assets left. Only debt disguised as luxury. Suddenly a black sedan pulled sharply into the driveway behind Victor's SUV. My stomach dropped the moment Vanessa stepped out wearing oversized sunglasses and expensive white resort clothing completely inappropriate for the storm surrounding us. She looked irritated before she even reached the porch. Marcus, what the hell is going on? She demanded loudly. Then she noticed Harold standing beside me and immediately frowned. Why is Harold here? Nobody answered fast enough. Vanessa's eyes narrowed suspiciously while glancing between all of us. What happened? Marcus stepped toward her quickly. Baby, just stay calm. That sentence alone terrified her immediately because people only say stay calm when disaster already arrived. Marcus, she repeated more sharply now. What happened? Victor Salazar approached slowly from the driveway holding several papers in one hand while rain soaked through his expensive suit jacket. Your husband attempted to sell us a property your family does not legally own. Vanessa laughed once automatically. Short. Disbelieving. What are you talking about? Victor handed her the trust documents directly. I suggest you read carefully. I watched the exact moment her expression changed while scanning the paperwork. Confusion first. Then disbelief. Then something far worse. Fear. Real fear. No, she whispered immediately while looking toward Marcus. What is this? Marcus reached for her arm but she pulled away instantly. Vanessa, let me explain. Explain what? She shouted suddenly. That you used our house as collateral? Our house. Even now she still believed the property belonged to her. Harold stepped forward carefully. Vanessa, the beach house legally belongs to your mother through a private trust established by Theodore years ago. Vanessa looked physically sick hearing that. No. Dad would never do that. Harold's voice softened slightly. He did. She turned slowly toward me then. Mom, is this true? I stared at my daughter standing barefoot on the same porch where Theodore once carried her after thunderstorms when she was little because loud thunder frightened her. She used to hide her face against his shoulder, while he promised nothing bad would ever happen to her as long as he was alive. Strange how adulthood changes people. Yes, sweetheart, I answered quietly. It is true. Vanessa shook her head rapidly while tears mixed with rain across her cheeks. No. Dad trusted me. Your father loved you, I corrected softly. Those are not always the same thing. Marcus stepped forward again, growing more desperate now. Lorraine, if this becomes public, we are ruined. Harold answered before I could. Marcus, your problems became public the moment you involved external investors. Vanessa turned toward her husband slowly like she no longer recognized the man standing beside her. How much debt are we talking about? Marcus looked away immediately. That silence frightened her more than any number could. Marcus. His voice finally cracked slightly. Almost 4 million. Vanessa actually stumbled backward hearing that. I instinctively moved toward her but she stepped away from both of us like the entire world suddenly felt unsafe. $4 million, she whispered. Marcus reached toward her again desperately. I was fixing it. By selling my mother's house? She screamed. The storm crashing around the beach suddenly felt tiny compared to the emotional collapse unfolding on that porch. Victor quietly signaled toward the younger woman and both of them returned to their vehicle without another word. Business people understand when financial situations become too unstable to salvage. Before leaving, Victor looked directly at Marcus one final time. Our attorneys will contact you. Then the SUV disappeared down the driveway, leaving only rain, wind, and silence behind. Vanessa looked shattered now. Completely shattered. You lied to me, she whispered toward Marcus. He tried speaking again but she interrupted immediately. How long? Vanessa. How long? He lowered his eyes finally. About 2 years. 2 years. My daughter spent 2 entire years living inside a marriage built on hidden collapse, while posting smiling vacation photographs online pretending everything was perfect. Theodore saw the truth long before any of us. That realization hurt almost as much as the betrayal itself. Vanessa slowly removed her sunglasses and looked at me with tears streaming openly now. Mom, you knew. I answered honestly. Not everything. But enough. Her expression twisted painfully. Why did you not tell me? I almost could not believe the question. Tell you what, sweetheart? That Marcus was lying. I looked at her quietly for several long seconds while ocean wind whipped violently across the porch around us. Because you stopped listening to me years ago. That sentence broke something inside her completely. I saw it happen in real time. Not dramatic. Not loud. Just quiet devastation spreading slowly across her face, while the truth finally settled around her from every direction at once. Theodore was gone. Her marriage was collapsing. The beach house never belonged to her. And for the first time in her life, money could not protect her from consequences. Vanessa left the beach house that afternoon without saying goodbye to me. She climbed into the black sedan beside Marcus while rain still poured across the driveway and slammed the passenger door hard enough to shake the entire vehicle. Marcus looked toward the porch one final time before driving away, but I could no longer read his expression clearly through the storm. Fear and pride often look identical on men like him. Harold remained beside me quietly until the sedan disappeared down the coastal road beyond the dunes. This is only the beginning, he said softly. I already knew that. Because financial collapse rarely happens in one dramatic moment. It arrives in waves. Small humiliations first. Then pressure. Then panic. Then exposure. The following week became strangely quiet. Too quiet. Vanessa stopped calling entirely. Marcus disappeared from social media. Their luxury travel photographs vanished online one by one, as if someone was desperately trying to erase evidence of a lifestyle they could no longer afford. Meanwhile, Harold continued uncovering more information almost daily. Marcus owed money to private lenders in Miami, Atlanta, and Charlotte. He had secretly borrowed against future business deals that never materialized. He even withdrew funds from Vanessa's retirement account without fully explaining it to her. Every new detail hurt me differently because I realized my daughter had not only become selfish, she had also become deeply lonely without understanding it. Vanessa spent years performing success beside a man who quietly destroyed their future behind closed doors. Theodore once told me something during the early years of our marriage that I never forgot. People who constantly chase status usually feel powerless somewhere inside. At the time I thought he was speaking about businessmen. Now I realized he was also describing our daughter. One Thursday morning about 3 weeks after the confrontation on the porch, I drove into Savannah for groceries and stopped at a small coffee shop near River Street that Theodore and I used to visit years ago before Brooks Coastal Holdings became enormous. The owner, Gloria Simmons, still worked there most mornings despite being almost 70 years old now. Gloria hugged me tightly the moment I walked inside. "Lorraine Brooks," she whispered sadly. "I heard about Theodore." Grief still hit unexpectedly, sometimes hearing his name spoken aloud by old friends. Gloria brought me coffee personally and sat across from me near the window overlooking the river. "How are you really doing?" she asked carefully. I considered lying automatically out of habit. Then I remembered how exhausting pretending had become lately. "Honestly," I sighed softly. "I think my family exploded before I even noticed the fire." Gloria nodded slowly, like someone who understood more than she wanted to admit. "Money does strange things to people." I stared down into my coffee quietly. Sometimes I wonder if Theodore spent years protecting me from realities I refused to see. Gloria smiled sadly. "Good men do that sometimes." Before I could answer, the small bell above the coffee shop door rang softly. I looked up automatically and nearly dropped my cup. Vanessa stood frozen near the entrance, wearing oversized sunglasses and wrinkled clothes that looked hastily thrown on. She looked thinner, exhausted, like someone who had not slept properly in days. The moment she saw me sitting near the window, her entire posture stiffened awkwardly. Gloria glanced between both of us, immediately sensing tension. "I should give you girls privacy," she said softly before walking away. Vanessa remained standing near the entrance for several uncomfortable seconds before finally approaching slowly. "Mom." I nodded gently toward the empty chair across from me. "Sit down, sweetheart." She sat carefully without removing her sunglasses. For almost 30 seconds neither of us spoke. Then finally I noticed her hands trembling slightly around the coffee menu. "Have you eaten today?" I asked quietly. She laughed once bitterly. "That sounds exactly like you." "What?" "Everything falls apart and you still ask if I ate." Because despite everything she remained my daughter. Some instincts survive betrayal. Vanessa finally removed her sunglasses, revealing swollen eyes and exhaustion across her face. My heart hurt immediately seeing her like that. Not because she was innocent. Because pain never stops being painful simply because someone deserves consequences. "Marcus moved out," she whispered suddenly. I stayed silent. 3 days ago. She looked down toward the table while twisting her wedding ring nervously. "Apparently there are other women too." That part did not surprise me as much as it should have. Men addicted to appearances often require constant admiration, the way other people require oxygen. "I am sorry," I said honestly. Vanessa shook her head slowly. "No, you are not." I looked at her calmly. "You are right. I am sad for you. That is different." She stared out the window toward the river for several moments before speaking again. "Everything is gone." "Not everything. The penthouse is in foreclosure." Her voice cracked slightly now. "The cars were repossessed yesterday." I felt my stomach tighten hearing that. Repossessed. Such an ugly, humiliating word. "Marcus hid everything from me," she whispered. Or maybe I did not want to look closely enough. That answer was more honest than anything she said in years. We sat quietly together while tourists wandered outside along the riverfront, completely unaware that my daughter's entire life was collapsing 2 feet away from them. Finally, Vanessa looked directly at me for the first time since sitting down. Did Dad hate me before he died? The question hit me harder than anything else that morning. No, I answered immediately. Your father loved you more than anyone on earth. Tears filled her eyes again. Then why did he trust me so little? I thought carefully before answering, because the truth mattered now more than comfort. Because love and trust are not identical things, sweetheart. She lowered her head immediately after hearing that. I really thought Marcus knew what he was doing. I know. I thought success meant we were winning at life. I reached slowly across the table and touched her hand gently. No, Vanessa. Success without peace is just performance. She cried quietly after that. Not dramatically. Not loudly. Just the exhausted tears of someone finally becoming too tired to defend illusions anymore. I do not know what to do now, she whispered. I looked out toward the Savannah River while ships moved slowly through the water under heavy gray clouds. Theodore spent his entire life understanding tides. Rising ones. Falling ones. Dangerous ones disguised as calm water. Maybe families work the same way. First, I said softly, you stop lying to yourself. Vanessa wiped at her eyes silently. Then what? I held her trembling hand gently across the small coffee shop table. Then you learn the difference between having money and having stability. She nodded weakly. And after that? I thought about Theodore's letter sitting hidden inside my bedroom drawer back at the beach house. The sentence repeating endlessly in my mind. Do not confuse mercy with weakness. After that, I answered quietly, you decide what kind of person you want to become once nobody is left to impress. Vanessa moved into the beach house 2 weeks later carrying only 3 suitcases and a face that no longer looked familiar to social media cameras. She arrived in a rideshare instead of a luxury vehicle because both lease cars were gone now. The Atlanta penthouse officially entered foreclosure proceedings and Marcus disappeared almost completely except for occasional messages, begging her not to cooperate with attorneys investigating the failed property sale. She ignored most of them. I watched quietly from the kitchen window while Vanessa stood near the driveway staring at the ocean like someone arriving in a foreign country, instead of the home where she spent most childhood summers. Part of me wanted to run outside and hold her immediately because no mother enjoys watching her child break apart emotionally no matter how deserved the consequences might be. But another part remembered the phone call. The beach house has already been sold. Bye. So instead I opened the front door calmly and waited. Vanessa walked slowly inside carrying her own luggage for the first time in years. No assistants. No movers. No luxury delivery services. Just exhaustion. Which room should I use? She asked quietly while avoiding eye contact. I thought about the upstairs guest suite she normally preferred with oceanfront windows and a private balcony. Then I remembered Theodore's voice years earlier telling me that comfort teaches nothing when people have spent too long escaping reality. The downstairs room near the laundry area is available, I replied softly. Vanessa blinked in surprise. The small one? Yes. She looked briefly hurt but nodded without arguing. That silence told me more about her emotional state than any tears could. Old Vanessa would have immediately complained. This version of my daughter simply picked up her bags and carried them downstairs quietly. Life had finally become heavy enough to humble her voice. The following weeks changed Vanessa more than the previous 5 years combined. At first she barely left the downstairs room except to eat small meals or stare silently at the ocean from the back porch. She slept late, ignored calls, cried when she thought I could not hear her through the hallway walls at night. One evening I found her sitting alone in Theodore's old workshop near the garage holding one of his fishing hats against her chest while staring at nothing. She looked up immediately embarrassed after noticing me standing in the doorway. Sorry, she whispered quickly. Her voice disappeared completely. I sat quietly beside her without speaking. The workshop still smelled faintly like cedar wood, motor oil and salt water. Theodore loved this room because it was the only place nobody demanded anything from him. Vanessa finally broke the silence after several minutes. I think Dad knew I would become this person eventually. I looked carefully at her tired face. No. Then why did he protect everything from me? Because Theodore understood human weakness better than anyone I have ever known. Vanessa lowered her eyes slowly. That sounds worse somehow. I thought about that before answering. Maybe because weakness sounds temporary, while character sounds permanent. She absorbed those words quietly. The next morning I handed Vanessa a folded paper list while she sat drinking coffee at the kitchen table. "What is this?" she asked. "Job applications." She stared at me like I had spoken another language entirely. "Jobs?" "Yes, sweetheart. Most adults need one." Shame immediately crossed her face because suddenly she realized how long it had been since she contributed anything meaningful beyond appearances and spending money. "Mom, I have not worked since Marcus started the consulting company." "Then this is an excellent time to remember how." The silence afterward felt uncomfortable but necessary. 2 days later Vanessa accepted part-time work at Gloria Simmons's coffee shop downtown. Gloria hired her mostly because she loved Theodore and pitied me. Vanessa's first shift nearly destroyed her emotionally. Wealthy tourists ignored her. Customers complained about drink orders. A teenager accidentally spilled iced coffee across her shoes and never apologized. When she returned home that evening she sat at the kitchen table staring blankly ahead while rubbing her sore feet. "You survived," I said gently while cooking dinner. Vanessa laughed weakly without humor. "Barely." "Good." She looked at me in disbelief. "Good." I turned toward her calmly. "Your father spent 40 years working through exhaustion without complaining, because he believed responsibility mattered more than comfort." Vanessa looked down at her blistered hands quietly. "I used to think people working jobs like this were unhappy because they lacked money. And now," she swallowed slowly, "now I think some of them are exhausted because people like me treated them like furniture." That answer mattered more than she realized. Real growth rarely arrives dramatically. Usually it begins with embarrassment. Weeks passed. Vanessa slowly changed in small, almost invisible ways. She stopped checking luxury fashion accounts online. She started cooking dinner occasionally without being asked. She apologized to Gloria after arriving late one morning instead of inventing excuses. She even began helping an older waitress named Diane carry supply boxes after learning Diane suffered from chronic back pain. One rainy afternoon I returned home unexpectedly early and found Vanessa sitting at the dining table surrounded by unpaid bills, legal notices, and financial statements. Her face looked pale and terrified again. "What happened?" I asked quietly. She slid one paper toward me silently. It was a formal notice regarding Marcus's remaining debt obligations connected to shared marital assets. Even after everything collapsed, there was still more damage waiting beneath the surface. "I do not understand any of this," she whispered. I sat beside her reading through the paperwork carefully while rain tapped softly against the kitchen windows. "Marcus hid credit lines inside joint accounts," I explained calmly. Vanessa covered her face immediately. "How could I be this stupid?" I lowered the paper slowly. "You were not stupid." She looked up with tears already forming. "Then what was I?" I answered honestly. Distracted by a lifestyle that rewarded appearances more than awareness. She cried quietly after that while the storm outside darkened the ocean into deep gray shadows. Finally she whispered something so softly I almost missed it. "I think I spent my entire adult life trying to look successful instead of becoming stable." Theodore would have been proud hearing that sentence because real self-awareness always mattered more to him than perfection. Later that night after Vanessa went upstairs I sat alone on the back deck, listening to waves crash beneath the darkness while thinking about how strange parenthood truly is. When children are young you spend years protecting them from pain. Then one day you realize pain may become the only thing capable of teaching them truths your love could not. 3 months after Vanessa moved back into the beach house I barely recognized the woman standing beside me in the kitchen each morning. The expensive designer clothing disappeared, slowly replaced by simple jean sweaters and practical shoes suitable for long shifts at Gloria Simmons's coffee shop. Her nails no longer looked professionally polished every week. The constant phone notifications from luxury brands and influencer friends stopped almost entirely. Even her voice changed somehow. Softer now. More careful. Like someone finally learning words matter after spending years throwing them around carelessly. One Sunday morning I woke before sunrise and found Vanessa sitting alone on the back deck wrapped in one of Theodore's old hooded sweatshirts while watching waves crash against the shoreline. Steam rose quietly from the coffee mug between her hands. Theodore loved sitting there before dawn because he believed the ocean sounded most honest before the world became noisy. I stood silently in the doorway for a moment, watching my daughter stare into the darkness like someone searching for pieces of herself she lost long ago. "You are up early," I said gently while stepping outside. Vanessa looked over her shoulder and gave a small tired smile. "Could not sleep." I sat beside her quietly while cold ocean wind moved through the deck railing around us. For several minutes neither of us spoke. Then suddenly Vanessa whispered something so quietly I almost missed it. "I think I understand Dad now." My chest tightened hearing that. "What do you mean?" She looked out toward the water again. "I used to think he cared about work more than family because he was always busy." She paused carefully. "But now I think he worked so hard because he was afraid of what would happen if he stopped protecting us. Theodore spent his entire life carrying invisible pressure none of us fully appreciated until after he died." "Your father understood responsibility deeply," I replied softly. Vanessa nodded slowly. "And I understood comfort deeply." The honesty in that sentence nearly broke my heart. Real humility sounds different from shame. Shame wants sympathy. Humility wants truth. Later that week Gloria pulled me aside while I visited the coffee shop during Vanessa's lunch break. "Your girls stayed 2 extra hours yesterday helping Diane clean after closing," Gloria said quietly while wiping down the counter. "Did not ask for overtime either." I smiled faintly. "That sounds unlike old Vanessa." Gloria laughed softly. "Baby, the old Vanessa would not even carry her own purse." We both looked toward the kitchen area where Vanessa quietly washed dishes beside Diane, while listening carefully to one of Diane's stories about raising 3 sons alone after her husband died years earlier. For the first time in a very long time my daughter looked present instead of performative. One evening Vanessa returned home carrying several grocery bags, and immediately started cooking dinner without saying much. I watched silently from the kitchen doorway while she chopped vegetables with focused determination. "What are you making?" I asked. "Seafood stew." I smiled slightly. "Your father's favorite." Vanessa nodded while stirring the pot slowly. I found his old recipe card in the drawer. The smell filling the kitchen almost physically hurt because suddenly Theodore felt very close again. Present somehow. Vanessa finally looked toward me while steam rose softly around her face. "Mom." "Yes, sweetheart." She swallowed carefully before speaking again. "I owe you an apology." I stayed silent because this moment mattered too much to interrupt. Vanessa set the spoon down slowly. "Not just for the house." Tears already filled her eyes now. "For years." She looked around the kitchen quietly. "You and Dad gave me everything and somehow I still became someone who treated love like guaranteed property." I felt my throat tighten painfully hearing her say that because deep down every parent secretly fears they failed somewhere important. "I judged people constantly," Vanessa continued softly. "I respected money more than character. I treated this house like an asset instead of a home. I treated you like an obstacle instead of my mother." She wiped tears from her face angrily. "And the worst part is I genuinely thought I was sophisticated." I walked slowly toward her then and touched her hand gently beside the stove. "No, Vanessa. The worst part would have been never realizing any of this." She cried openly after that while standing in Theodore's kitchen holding the recipe card he wrote by hand nearly 20 years earlier. Some moments change families permanently. This was one of them. A few days later Harold Whitmore invited both of us to his Charleston office regarding final legal proceedings connected to Marcus's debt investigations. Vanessa looked terrified the entire drive there despite trying hard to appear calm. Harold greeted us warmly before leading us into a large conference room overlooking Charleston Harbor. Several attorneys sat around the table reviewing financial files and legal records. Marcus was already there. The moment Vanessa saw him she froze completely. He looked terrible. Thinner. Unshaven. Exhausted in a way expensive suits could no longer hide. For a second I almost felt sorry for him until I remembered the calculated way he tried removing me from my own home while Theodore's funeral flowers still sat fresh in the dining room. Marcus stood awkwardly when we entered. "Vanessa." She did not answer. Harold calmly explained the remaining debt settlements and fraud investigations, while attorneys reviewed repayment structures connected to Marcus's failed business dealings. Most of the language sounded technical and emotionally cold, but underneath every number sat years of deception. Eventually one attorney slid several final documents toward Marcus. Once signed these agreements, close your remaining ownership claims against any Brooks family assets. Marcus stared at the papers silently for a long moment before finally signing them one by one. Watching him do that felt strangely surreal. Years earlier he entered our family acting like a man climbing upward into wealth and influence. Now he sat quietly surrendering every illusion piece by piece beneath fluorescent office lighting. After the meeting ended, Marcus approached Vanessa cautiously near the elevator lobby. "Can we talk privately?" Vanessa looked emotionally exhausted but nodded slightly. I remained several feet away near the windows while they spoke softly together. I could not hear every word clearly, but I noticed Marcus crying at one point while Vanessa simply listened silently without rescuing him emotionally anymore. Eventually she walked back toward me alone. "What did he say?" I asked quietly while we waited for the elevator. Vanessa stared ahead thoughtfully. "He said he spent his entire life trying to outrun feeling poor." I nodded slowly because Theodore predicted exactly that years ago. "And?" Vanessa looked down briefly before answering. "I told him I spent my entire life trying to outrun feeling ordinary." The elevator doors opened softly beside us. As we stepped inside together, I suddenly realized something important. Pain had finally stripped away every false identity my daughter spent years performing for the world. And underneath all the arrogance, insecurity, and obsession with appearances, there was still a good woman trying to find her way back home. Almost a year after Theodore died, the beach house finally felt alive again instead of haunted. The silence inside these walls changed slowly over time. In the beginning, grief filled every room like heavy fog. Then betrayal replaced it. After that came anger, disappointment, shame, and exhaustion. But eventually something softer arrived. Honesty. Real honesty. The kind families usually avoid until life forces them to stop pretending. Vanessa continued working at Gloria Simmons's coffee shop, even after Harold finished resolving the final legal issues connected to Marcus's debts. One evening I asked why she still worked there when financially she no longer needed to. She smiled while wiping down the kitchen counter after dinner. "Because for the first time in my life I know exactly how much a dollar costs emotionally." That answer sounded so much like Theodore it nearly made me cry. Marcus eventually left Georgia entirely after settling several investigations and liquidating what remained of his failed businesses. I heard through Harold that he moved to Arizona and started working for a small construction supply company owned by a distant cousin. Quietly. No luxury branding. No expensive suits. No pretending. I do not know whether Marcus became a better man after everything collapsed. But sometimes consequences teach lessons pride never could. One Saturday morning near the end of summer, Vanessa and I sat together on the back deck drinking coffee, while watching pelicans dive into the Atlantic waves below the dunes. The sunrise painted the ocean gold and orange, exactly the way Theodore loved most. Vanessa looked healthier now. Stronger somehow. Not glamorous. Not polished. Real. "Can I ask you something honestly?" she said quietly. "Always." She wrapped both hands around her coffee mug before speaking again. "Did you ever think about throwing me out after what I did?" I answered truthfully because lies no longer served either of us anymore. "Yes." She nodded slowly like she expected that answer. "What stopped you?" I looked out toward the horizon while ocean wind moved softly through the deck railing. "Your father." Vanessa stayed silent, waiting for me to continue. "Theodore spent his entire life protecting this family. Not our money. Not the company. Us." I paused briefly. "And protecting people only matters when it is hardest." Tears quietly filled Vanessa's eyes again, but she smiled faintly through them. "I spent years thinking wealth meant having things other people envied." I reached over, gently squeezing her hand. "And now?" She laughed softly. "Now I think wealth is sleeping peacefully without needing to impress anyone." Theodore would have loved hearing that sentence. Later that afternoon, Harold arrived carrying another sealed envelope from Theodore's office records. "I debated waiting longer before giving this to you," he admitted while handing it toward me. "But I think Theodore intended the timing for now." Vanessa and I exchanged surprised glances before I carefully opened the envelope together at the dining room table. Inside sat several handwritten pages from Theodore dated only 3 months before his death. I immediately recognized the careful precision of his handwriting. Lorraine, if you are reading this, then perhaps the storm has finally passed through our family. I need both you and Vanessa to understand something clearly. Money was never the real inheritance I wanted to leave behind. Stability was. Character was. The ability to survive hardship without becoming cruel was. I built structures around our assets because wealth without wisdom destroys families faster than poverty ever could. Vanessa, if you are reading beside your mother, then life probably humbled you enough to finally hear this truth properly. Your mother carried this family emotionally long before I built anything financially. Every success people credit me for was built on sacrifices she quietly made while nobody watched. Respect that. Learn from that. And Lorraine, if forgiveness still feels difficult, remember this. Broken people often chase appearances because they are terrified nobody will love who they really are underneath them. Fear makes people selfish sometimes. But pain can also rebuild them if they are willing to look honestly at themselves. I stopped reading because my voice trembled too much to continue. Vanessa covered her mouth while crying openly beside me. Harold quietly stepped outside onto the deck, giving us privacy while ocean waves crashed softly in the distance beyond the windows. For several minutes neither of us spoke. Then finally Vanessa whispered something that mattered more than any apology she gave before. Dad spent years trying to teach me things money kept distracting me from. I nodded slowly. He tried teaching all of us. That night Vanessa cooked dinner using Theodore's seafood stew recipe, while old jazz music played softly through the kitchen speakers. We laughed at small mistakes while chopping vegetables and accidentally burning garlic bread because neither of us paid attention to the oven timer. Simple moments suddenly felt precious now in ways expensive vacations never did. After dinner we carried coffee onto the back deck, while moonlight reflected across the dark Atlantic Ocean. You know something strange? Vanessa said quietly while staring toward the water. What? She smiled faintly. Losing everything turned out to be the first honest thing that ever happened to me. I looked at my daughter carefully then. Not the version obsessed with appearances and status. Not the frightened little girl hiding behind expensive lifestyles and social validation. Just Vanessa. Flawed. Humbled. Human. And finally awake. Theodore understood something years before the rest of us did. Sometimes the greatest protection a parent can give their child is allowing consequences to reveal the truth before life becomes cruel enough to destroy them completely. The beach house still stands 15 yards from the ocean, exactly where Theodore built it decades ago. But now when I sit on the back deck listening to waves crash against the shoreline at night, I no longer think about betrayal first. I think about survival, about second chances, about how easy it is for people to lose themselves chasing lives designed to impress strangers. And I think about Theodore quietly building invisible walls around this family long before any of us realized we would someday need protection from ourselves. In the end, the house was never the real inheritance at all. The real inheritance was learning that love without honesty becomes weakness and wealth without character becomes ruin. Everything else was just paperwork.